Mindshift Talk, powered by Create Mindspace with Katrin Büßmann.
IQ, intellectual quotient, how smart you are is important. But the EQ, I would say, is probably even more important as you do this work, and trying to bring your full self to work means that you have to show some vulnerability, right? You have to be a little bit emotional. We sometimes joke that like crying at work is not bad. It's okay. Because that just shows that you're human.
Mindshift Talk is a gateway to a more humane, conscious future. The foundation is mindfulness. Come and explore with an open mind and heart to find beautiful ways to grow, listen, learn, connect, thrive in community, and restore. Dive deeper into an innovative approach to reframe the concept of wellness itself and what it means to live a well-lived life. It is a platform to share, educate, and inspire. Thank you so much for listening to the first episode already and making this a successful launch. I'm excited to announce Dr. Susan Sweeney as my guest speaker for today's dialogue for our series on gaining insights and acquiring tools to implement mindfulness and emotional intelligence in a corporate environment. Define challenges, determine possibilities, create opportunities. Susan currently holds the role of Chief Human Resource Officer for EnPro Industries. Previous to taking this position in early 2020, she held the position of President GGB with business oversight responsibility in North America, South America, Europe, and Asia. With more than 35 years of experience in the field of manufacturing, she's able to quickly assess critical business functions and operations to achieve extraordinary results. Susan combines strategic vision, operational expertise, and technical curiosity to lead change and transform businesses across the globe. Her passion is unleashing potential by connecting people and ideas, and believes today's complex and quickly changing environment requires a different kind of leadership model. Susan lives in the US in Delaware with her husband and has 2 adult sons. For me, Susan, you're an amazing inspiration under today's leaders, and I'm so grateful for you taking the time sharing your expertise with us here today at #Mindshift Talk. You are here with us to talk a little bit about your journey and share usable tools on how you implement mindfulness and emotional intelligence into your life and work, making it one key element, or can we say foundation, on how to approach life. Would you please share a little bit about yourself and where you are today, and what should people maybe know about you so they really know who you are?
Well, thanks, Katrin. I'm really happy to be here today. If I had to describe, how I got here or where I am, I think I'm on a journey. Mm-hmm. My background is very traditional. I started working in manufacturing. I actually started working in a automobile manufacturing plant in Detroit, Michigan, if you can believe that, quite a few years ago, about 35 years ago. And I worked in various automotive manufacturing sites for probably 24 years before joining EnPro. And that was about 10 years ago. And I have found that just the practice of meditation and mindfulness really gives me the capacity to handle, life and all the challenges that it throws at us in a different way. So it's probably just my overview of what I would say of how it has helped me. In my leadership capacity, my background is, I said, manufacturing, leading very large, complex plants, large groups of people, very diverse around the world. It's important to understand that my point of view is not always the only point of view, and building that ability to listen and be present and to be able to let others put their voices into the room and help make ideas better is super important to me.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you. And you, as you mentioned already, you have a very successful career in the corporate world, more than 10 years with EnPro. as far as I've seen from the research, first really with GGB as president, and now beginning of the year, you transitioned into the position of Chief Human Resources Officer at EnPro directly. Can you maybe tell us a little bit about your corporate career path and what led you to discover mindfulness as a strategy?
That's a great question. So as I said, I've been in this position where, just making things, right? Whether it was manufacturing cars or making different things, I really get excited about that particular area. And it's the people and the engineering and the science that come together. And I would say historically, my response was always, I would get upset about a situation and I would realize that taking a walk was helpful, or going outside, or even doing, deep breathing exercises. But it was always a response after something had happened. And, after I started learning more about centering, meditation, just being more purposeful, I realized that doing this practice before a situation, maybe a difficult meeting or a gathering of people, taking 5 or 10 minutes, just quietly centering, made a huge difference. And the practices that we put in place at EnPro has really, I guess, solidified that for me, that's important. So if we're about to have a meeting, even though it might seem like a lot of time for a 45-minute meeting, to take 5 minutes and just have, intentional breathing or a centering exercise, it makes those next, 40 minutes of the meeting so much more impactful. And it just has everyone present. Their minds are there. They're ready to work on whatever the topic is. And it's really, I found it to be a differentiator for us in business from an individual perspective and for whatever problem that we're trying to solve in the organization.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's it makes such a big difference, right? To kind of just create the specific space for a meeting like that, right? Yeah.
It really does. And it's a practice.
Yes, for sure. Yes. And what I learned about EnPro, I saw you speaking last year at the Mindful Leadership Conference in Washington, and I learned quite some around kind of what you do already at EnPro. But what I really learned was you have a deep commitment to your people and your business with a specific approach you call the dual bottom line approach. Can you maybe talk a little bit more about what that really means, and maybe share a little bit more as well about your company values, safety, excellence, and respect?
Sure. So the dual bottom line concept is really that we value people and people development as equal as the financial results. I have a personal belief that if you can get the right talent and the right people, in the right positions, the business is going to run well. And so this dual bottom line is making sure that we're spending as much time, all the time, on people as we are looking at, the balance sheet or the P&L or all the things that measure how we're doing financially. And I really think that that's meaningful, particularly in today's day and age, because we value the individual and we really want the best for the individual. And I don't pretend to know what that possibility might be for the individual, but we create the environment in which each individual can flourish. And you mentioned our values, safety, excellence, and respect. Those are something that we just don't compromise. So safety might seem very obvious. We're a manufacturing company. We make things, we bend metal, we cut things. People are in contact with machines and tools and things, that they potentially could be hurt. So physical safety is super important. And, one thing I'm very proud of, EnPro has received America's Safest Company Award 3 different times. You can only win it once every 5 years.
Congratulations. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. And we've won that. But even more important, frankly, than physical safety is psychological safety. And that's something we've added over the past 5 or 6 years. It's very important. People have to feel safe to come to work, to be their whole selves, and to really be who they are. We don't want someone to be something different at home than they are at work, which is pretty ironic because now home and work is all melded together, right? But we want people to show up as their full human self. Excellence seems obvious as well, but excellence means not perfection, but what's the best we can do with the information that we have, with the best minds working on a particular, problem or opportunity. What is it that we want to accomplish? Mm-hmm. And so we just strive for excellence in everything we do. And then with respect, I would say that that's, again, a value that really is meaningful, that every person, doesn't matter, what their gender is, what their color is, what their culture is, where they work, they know that when they show up, they're going to be respected, and they're expected to respect those that they work with. And I think that really helps people be their best when they realize that they're safe, that they're loved, and they're worthy, and they can show up as a full human being. That's what's special, I think, about the dual bottom line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's, I think, where probably a lot of creativity starts too, right? Because people feel really safe to really speak out what they believe in and what they would like to maybe see going forward. Yeah,
I think that's true. We have some pretty smart people that work for us, right? And when they can combine being super smart with creative, that's where the magic begins.
Yes, beautiful. I can imagine. Great. And I think it's probably quite some work as well to really implement that into a culture. And I saw that you implemented a program years ago already, which is called Building Our Workplace, BOW. And I think it's really focusing on on that dual bottom line to bring that culture into your company. Can you talk a little bit of those key pillars of a workshop like that? Is mindfulness and emotional intelligence, do they play a role in that?
Absolutely. So building our workplace is really one of the introductory workshops that we have. So everyone that joins the EnPro team takes part in that workshop. And so it helps people be introduced to the culture, the values, our principles, how we work. And so that's really important because we expect everyone to be part of building, EnPro. So that's why we call it Building Our Workplace, because everyone equally is responsible. And that's kind of a new concept to many people, right? We're not trying to just teach them, this is EnPro and do what EnPro is. No, you're part of EnPro and have to start to help to build it the first day that you come to work. And some of the things that are important, absolutely, IQ, intellectual quotient, how smart you are is important. But the EQ, I would say, is probably even more important as you do this work. And trying to bring your full self to work means that you have to show some vulnerability, right? You have to be a little bit emotional. We sometimes joke that crying at work is not bad. It's okay. Because that just shows that you're human.
Yes.
And one of the things we talk about in building our workplace and frankly in all of our work is some of these basic things like being open-minded. It's important that you're open to other ideas. It's important that you listen deeply, not just come and advocate, your own ideas or your own solutions, but listen to others, because often others will either make your idea better or they'll just come with a better idea. Being curious, deeply curious, is very important to us. We don't want people to assume that they have the answer, but to ask questions, because in today's world, no one can have the answer. And frankly, a leader, I'll just use myself. I know that I limit the organization. And so I have to ask questions to try to discover what, might be emerging in the world. Managing self, we talk about being mindful, but managing self is very important. Whenever you show up, making sure that we use I statements too, so I have to correct myself, that I'm not showing up trying to be overbearing or to push a particular agenda. Being courageous, we often one hears about being courageous as a manager or a leader. We expect every individual at EnPro to be courageous, whether that's courageous to speak up if they disagree with their boss, whether it's courageous to ask a question, or maybe it's to launch something new, to be innovative and to try something new, even if they might fail. That's okay. And then the collaboration, I would say, is one of the other areas that's really important, particularly because the collective intelligence with what's emerging in the world you need collaboration. You need multiple people, a diversity of views, a diversity of opinions to really come up with the best answer. So those are some of the concepts that we use, but then we also practice in that first workshop, building our workplace. How do you show up as I mentioned, your authentic self, and practice sharing with others? And often they're people that you don't know. Mm-hmm. And so all of a sudden you're thrust into this group that very quickly you become a bit more intimate with, and you're able to share and open up and talk about some of your fears and maybe some of the things that you're hopeful for within the company.
Yes. Yeah. Wow. That's definitely big, I would say, to really implement pieces like that into a corporate culture. Congratulations. I think that's definitely, amazing. And so when you described already, so kind of the key tools in regards to what we know about mindfulness, maybe having like this check-in you mentioned already, you're taking almost like 5 minutes, even for like a 45-minute meeting. So these are kind of really guidelines you have integrated into the culture. Like when you do these workshops, especially for 2 days, you have really like kind of things implemented like mindful movement and meditation guidelines and things like that.
Yeah. So if I took just a typical meeting, it doesn't even have to be a workshop. It could just be let's just say it's a 1-hour meeting. We have guidelines that we use. We definitely do a centering, and it could be a couple minutes, or, sometimes people are very brave and they'll say, look, we need a 10-minute or a 15-minute centering because of whatever the topic is that we're, want to talk about. Or maybe it's because we just had a meeting and it was, difficult, and people's minds are pretty, maybe they're agitated, or, they're quite active. So a centering exercise just brings everyone into the present. We then do a practice that we call check-in. And the check-in is really just to let people know how you're coming to the meeting. So I think this is important. I'll just explain it real quickly. Is my experience has always been that people show up at a meeting, you have no idea where they've come from or what's going on in their world. Maybe they have a sick parent, maybe their child's sick, maybe their dog's sick, maybe their car broke down on the way to work. Who knows what happened? But in our check-in, it gives everyone just a minute or so to say, hey, here's how I'm showing up. So it might be that I woke up anxious this morning because, fill in the blank, or I'm really excited today because, and it just lets people understand how I am showing up. I understand how you're showing up. And then we get into the topic of the meeting. And so we do the centering, we do the check-in. We do have a basic agenda that we ask people to follow, which, use I statements, own what you're saying, make sure that every voice is equal in the room, make sure that, you're very clear on what you're trying to achieve for that day or that meeting. So whether it's a discussion, a decision, you're looking for more ideas, just being very explicit with that. And then after you've had the meeting, we actually do a check out, which would be a bit of a post-action review of the meeting. So it might be, hey, I thought we did a good job today with everyone contributing. Or sometimes it's a little more, difficult. And it might say, oh, Katrine, I thought you did a better job today, but you really pushed your own ideas and you didn't listen very well. This is how I felt because you didn't listen to me. And those are more difficult, but they really help build that muscle of being authentic and showing up, as your full self with your best ideas every day. So it's a process that, one has to experience and has to work through to really understand, how to use it in a meaningful way.
Yeah, and I can imagine when you maybe start new at EnPro, it is maybe a big adjustment, right? If you come from a totally different company culture. Can you maybe speak a little bit about challenges you see as well, or and opportunities, of course, as well? Because I notice as well what you mentioned, that it's really beautiful how people really expect a check-in now, even maybe longer sometimes. So you probably see a big shift in teams too, right? When they collaborate in that way more and kind of have a different setting going into a meeting.
Absolutely. So if you think about it, my experience in other companies has been that you spend a lot of your energy on, the political maneuvering or making sure that, you're in the right position for whatever idea that you're trying to push. I appreciate that I don't have to spend energy in that particular area with the way that we work. So I think that's a huge plus. You can just do the work and show up as your true self. The challenges are, especially as our culture continues to evolve, as new people come in, we really have to make sure that we're clear on what environment the person is entering. Not everyone adapts well to this environment. It sounds wonderful if that's what you're looking for, but if you're looking for a command and control environment, or you're looking for a more hierarchical, traditional workplace, I guess this might not be the right type of setting for you, and it might be a little more difficult to adjust.
Yeah, I can imagine. And in general, when you look at mindfulness and emotional intelligence, how do you experience the path, like in general, maybe more like in the corporate environment? Do you notice interest and openness towards these topics, or rather like hesitation or even resistance?
That's a great question, too. I think it's a mixed bag. People that are interested tend to gravitate towards one another, right? So when we look for it and we find people that are thinking similarly, certainly it appears that everyone thinks that mindfulness is important. I think more and more people, particularly with just the disruptive changes that are going on, right, with machine learning and artificial intelligence, I think the differentiator people are starting to recognize is that this capacity for being human and being able to really connect to source is super important, because a machine can't do that. A machine can't be curious. A machine can add up numbers or move a part from point A to point B, but that essence of being human, a machine cannot replicate, at least not yet. And so I do think that we're seeing that there's this particular maybe competitive advantage to being human if you're able to access that. And what I see is that people, they really function better. So you get better results from the business perspective if you use some of these practices. It's better for the individual, it's better for the team. I think ultimately it's probably better for the company. So the people that I see that are interested in plugging into that do feel like there's an advantage, and they do want to learn more and meet people that have used these practices and this perspective. They want to learn from each other in a meaningful way.
Yeah, and I think that's one of my experiences, like that I see a lot that companies are really getting interested in the topic and implementing maybe even a department or maybe just some sessions into the company as a foundation. Often there's a lot of hesitation, though, because of the challenge to really scale the return of investment. Do you at EnPro have any measurements in place like that, or is it more like really through experience that you're sharing?
It is hard to measure how one experiences mindfulness. I think what we do measure is, are we using the practices and what are our results? So I guess it goes back to a little bit this dual bottom line. For me, it's really saying, are we starting every meeting with a centering, and how are people feeling about that? Across EnPro, I would say that we don't have necessarily maybe a KPI that says, how is mindfulness helping us? But we can measure that we're attracting great talent because of the culture, and we can look at the results of where the company's going and how it's kind of reinventing itself in a pretty meaningful way. And as that's being done, particularly under the current situation, right, with COVID, and the fact that there's still this very positive generative power in the company, I think it's going to last and continue to build.
Yeah, I can see that. And if you think about, like, if we have listeners now who would love to maybe start something at their company in regards to mindfulness, even maybe implementing a full department, do you maybe have like 3 key main recommendations how to get started? Some ideas they can take, from maybe, just. get some inspiration?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I would say start small. I personally had to start with a daily practice. I signed up for an app on my phone. I was traveling a lot at the time, so it was helpful to me. The guided meditations really helped. So I started doing them individually. One of the small groups that I was a part of started using the same app. And so we started sharing it. And, as you start to kind of build that muscle and, we start every meeting with a centering, I think that's helpful. And to talk about it is really helpful. I remember the first time I went into one of the factories that I was running, and I had the union president, and I said, let's go in this room and I'm going to show you what centering is. And you're going to think I'm crazy. And then we're going to talk about the science behind it. And so that took a lot of courage for me to do that, because I had a good relationship with him. And I was very afraid that he was going to think that, what's wrong with her? Why is she doing this? But what was interesting is he got it. And, we still, that was 5-6 years ago, we still talk about that day. And he thinks it's funny because he said, you were so nervous about it. And I did think you were crazy. But, I think it's a good thing now. I can see how it helps calm people down. So whatever that interpretation is, you have to help people understand the why. And so I often go to the science when I'm trying to explain why we do this, whether it's to a new employee or maybe someone in the organization that doesn't understand why we're practicing the meditation and the centering. So practice small, start small, explain the why, use an app or some sort of a guided meditation that'll help you. And I even started keeping track of how many times per day I was doing a centering, because then I often thought, I do it every day. And I thought I was really good until I kept track of it and realized, I'm not as good as I thought I was when I measured it. So you talked about measurement earlier. Personally, when I started measuring, I realized that I needed to be a little more focused.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And with that, because I wanted to ask a couple of more personal questions too in regards to your own practice. So you mentioned already, so for you, it's really important to really use that centering practice and meditation daily. Can you maybe talk about, do you have another practice you can recommend, or maybe even have a challenge to our listeners, what they can get started with? Because what I noticed in the beginning, when I started to get into this field, it was really hard to even sit just for a moment in stillness. And I think that's where a lot of people really stop right away, because they think maybe I can't do this. My mind is running off and I'm going, it's going wild. Do you maybe have something you could recommend?
Well, it's definitely a practice, right? It's imperfect. So I would first say, give yourself a little bit of grace. Whether it's just being able to count your breaths for 1 minute and do that every day for a week, and next week you can do it for 2 minutes, right? It's just about little steps. I have found that my practice is walking. So I now, I need to go out and walk every day. I go for hikes in the woods at least 2 or 3 times a week. And I mean long hikes for, an hour and a half, just because it helps me to think. I've been doing a practice of gratitude, which I've also helped with positivity in my, mental state. So if you intentionally practice gratitude, it just, I don't know, there's something about it that helps counter negativity of the world. Making sure that I'm thanking people every day and appreciating what people are doing, even small things, right? Someone brings me a cup of coffee. In my world, that's maybe my husband bringing me a cup of coffee, right? Because I don't go anywhere, but just thanking him for bringing me a cup of coffee. It's a simple little thing, but it's important. And so I'm trying to push the different practices I have, the breathing, listening to music, taking walks, getting out in nature. Those all help me as a form of meditation. So I'm not sure if that's helpful, but those are some of the practices that I'm using.
No, I think that's beautiful. Nature for me is a big one too. I really do that every day too, because it's so helpful to really ground into nature and connect back to, where we come from, kind of. So I can totally share that one. Yeah, and maybe just one last one. I really truly believe only awareness creates change, and we need to really have a mind shift in our culture on how we operate on a global level, not only in the corporate world, but as well in our personal lives, and hence the name of the talk here as well, to really create a new gateway to a more humane and conscious future. Maybe you can share a little bit, what's your take on that? And what would your vision for mindfulness and emotional intelligence be in the corporate environment?
I think it would start with quieting the ego, particularly in the corporate setting. If we can all realize that it's not about us, right? It's not about me. It's not about you. And recognizing that, I think that would be great. I also have learned that the only person in my way is me. And I know that sounds crazy, but I've encountered this with others. So I think it's actually a reoccurring theme. I think our brains tell us that we're not able to do something because, and it, might name another person or another situation. I think the majority of the time, just looking in the mirror and recognizing that, I'm the biggest obstacle. And if I could just work on my own stuff, the world will get better. My situation in the world will get better. So that for me is a really big learning. I wish I'd started my mindfulness practices when I was in my 20s. I think that would have probably opened a capacity for me that would be much different. I mean, I don't regret many things, but if you're young and you're listening to this podcast, please start this practice now. That would be one thing that I would encourage you to do. I know I talk to my kids about it and younger people, even if it's just practicing breathing when you get upset to try and regulate your body. And I just think that mindfulness practices and being in control of your thoughts just increase your capacity to handle what comes at you in the world. And so, being able to handle, whether it's a little stress or a really big problem, having something to fall back on to help you handle that is so important. So I'm a big fan, and I encourage others to, if you don't know about mindfulness, learn more about it. If you're already practicing, keep practicing, share your practices, and really push the boundaries of what you're doing.
Oh, yeah, thank you. That's a great statement to end this today. Yes, I think there's so much more to talk about for sure, but I think you really gave some great insight. And I thank you so much for joining us today here and really sharing your journey and your wisdom and your insight. And I wish you all the best for what's to come at EnPro and in your life in general. And that, this path might unfold into exactly what it needs to be. So, thank you.
Katrine, thank you. And thanks for what you're doing in the world.
Thank you, Susan.
This was #MindShift Talk. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned for our next episode with another amazing leader to share her journey. To learn more about Create Mindspace, check out katrinbußmann.com. My gratitude goes out to my sister Tomke for bringing this to life with me.